When religion spread, it spread by the sword, not by coercion. Every nation needs power. Isn't there a contradiction in this? Yes, please, Professor Muhammad, answer. People don't convert simply by knowing the truth. Yes, you Muslims come up with a nice idea. Whoever wants to convert, convert. Will victory come through words alone? Do I understand from this that the essence of our Islam and our call is to spread it with kind words, not with the sword? All the prophets was, peace be upon him, were only in response to the aggression of other nations. When they moved and when they triumphed, they crushed humanity. A person devoid of divine oversight commits falsehood for their own benefit. We look to the right and see there is no compulsion in religion. We look to the left and find the noble prophetic hadith, I have been commanded to fight the people until they testify that there is no God but God. Otherwise, Islam itself is what denies the rights of those who do not convert. Professor Muhammad, so that we remain poor. The question is from the group that is hurting him. What is the goal of the Muslims? Arming oneself with strength, bearing the sword, and spreading Islam means that justice will prevail. Peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. This is the 13th episode of the 100 Questions in History series, episode number 13. I also welcome, through you, Professor Muhammad Al-Harni, the regular guest of this series. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Abu Al-Harith, and reward you. By the way, Professor Muhammad, we are filming this episode after my return from my trip to Damascus, God willing. So, I wanted to tell you that while I was there in Damascus and you were saying the internet was non-existent, I mean, non-existent. People were watching the series and they were following it and sending their greetings to you. I mean, I send my greetings from here to all our beloved people of the Levant, the people of Syria, and the people of Damascus. Yes, I ask God Almighty to grant them victory, triumph, honor, and empowerment. Amen. To the point that I was in an area called Sarakib, which feels a bit far and such, but I also met someone and told him I'm following the 100 Questions in History program. I was extremely pleased because this is what you want. Ultimately, you want people to benefit from this series. Yes, my brothers, this series through which we answer pressing questions in our Islamic history, and we've reached question number 27, Professor Muhammad, and we're still on the topic of the Prophet's biography. Question number says, yes, you Muslims came up with this nice and beautiful idea called Islam, and you want to present it to people in this way, calmly and in the best way possible. Whoever wants to convert, let them convert, and so on. So, how do you explain this religion of mercy, this religion of humanity, that you speak of, this religion of justice and tolerance towards others? How do you explain its spread naturally, without the sword? When the religion spread, it spread by the sword, not by coercion and force, not by kind words and gradual methods. In order to spread this Islamic religion, please, Professor Muhammad, answer. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, God and his family and companions and those who follow him. Look, you're coming back from Damascus, saying, so you're a man, you've come from experience. From what kind of experience? A real, intense one. How can truth prevail? Will it prevail simply by words I mentioned in your speech? You know, the verse by Ahmed Shorki, they said, you invaded, but the messengers of God were not sent to kill a soul, nor did they come to shed my blood. Ignorance and delusion, dreams and sophistry of turbans, evil.
تكفل السيف بالجهال
If
والعجم والشر إن تلقه بالخير ضقت به ذرعا وإن تلقه بالشر ينحسم.
beautiful praises
هذا
of
من بديع مدح
Ahmed Shorty, and by the
الرسول على
way,
فكرة.
he
وهو
also
نظرا
repeated this
في
meaning in his other poem,
هذه
which
الأخرى التي
begins, asked,
أوصلوا
My
قلبي
heart,
ذات
it has
السواد
become restless and broken. He says in it,
يقول
and we
فيها
taught the building of glory until we seized control of the land by force. So, the attainment of desires is not by mere conjecture, but the world is taken by force, and nothing is unattainable for a people if courage is there. Steed, excuse me, I mean, your question or my situation is related to these verses of poetry, but I return and remind myself, and I remind the viewers, and I remind you, Abu al-Harith, of the episode before the past, or before the past, and we ask why, despite the Prophet peace and blessings be upon him being mentioned in the Torah and the Gospel, the Jews and Christians did not believe, even though their leaders at least knew him. And why did the polytheists of Quraysh, after testifying to the Prophet's truthfulness, say, Yes, we have never known you to lie? Why did these and those disbelieve in the Prophet peace and blessings be upon him? A reality of the life we live in, the things we witness within ourselves, is that people are not guided simply by knowing the truth. A person does not do what is right, nor does he refrain from wrongdoing just because he knows that this is right and this is wrong. This is correct and this is incorrect. This is truth and this is falsehood. No, many things drive a person to commit wrongdoing even though he knows it is wrong. We said it could be due to the dominance of desire. The dominance of desire, the presence of self-interest, the desire for superiority, the pursuit of power on earth, the weight of custom and tradition. We found our fathers following a certain way, and we are following in their footsteps many things. So were all the criminals who entered prisons now unaware of this. What they are doing is wrong, absolutely wrong. So why are you assuming a perfect, dreamy, rosy world where people are guided simply by knowing the truth? That's something you read in cartoons, in novels, children's novels that aren't even suitable for adults. The reality, Sheikh Murad, is that most people are defeated by Satan. He said, By your might, I will surely mislead them all, except for your chosen servants among them. And he said, Then I will come at them from their front and from their rear and from their right and from their left, and you will not find most of them grateful. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, God says, Bring forth the contingent of hellfire. So what is the contingent of hellfire? Out of every 1,999 are in hell and one is in paradise. Oh God! Yes, unfortunately, most people are not guided simply by knowing the truth. Therefore, it was necessary for the truth to take up arms and fight. I mean, the prophets are the best of God's creation. Yes, they came with the complete truth. I mean, someone like me or you or anyone else, we all have our faults and our right, our truth and our falsehood, our shortcomings. None of us are infallible, not even the prophets. They are infallible, and the truth they possess is the complete truth revealed to them by God Almighty. They are the most perfect of people in both form and character. They are the most eloquent in expression and the best in morals. Yet these prophets, who are the epitome of perfection and possess absolute truth, were opposed by many of their people. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, A prophet will come on the day of resurrection with one man, another with two men, and yet another with no 1. The reality of the world, the reality of humanity, is that if this truth is not armed with power, it will be slaughtered, oppressed, and crushed. Therefore, the prophets, including our prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, were forced to fight and to take up their sword. But here, I must make a strong distinction, and the matter must be clear. Islam, the religion, spread by the sword, not that anyone was forced to
يعني في حد من الناس
convert
أجبر
to
على
Islam,
الإسلام إجبارا، قيل له أسلم وإلا قتلت.
killed. No, that
صحيح.
didn't happen. But the
لكن الدولة
Islamic State
الإسلامية
expanded by the sword. Yes, it expanded by the
بأي
sword,
دولة
like any
أخرى؟
state.
هل في
In
دولة أخرى
history,
حكمت
is
تحت
there any
الإسلام؟
state in history that didn't expand by the sword? There isn't.
يسأل هذا السؤال.
Professor Muhammad asks this question while his eyes are closed. Then, as soon as he hears the words Muslims, wars, battles, and fighting, he opens his eyes and says, "Oh, wait a minute." He's closed his eyes to his history, to all the people and the nation he comes from, to everyone. He only opens his eyes and his world when we come to Islam. So, you said something very important to the idea that the religion itself spread by the sword. No, no, yes, but Islam itself. In order for the Islamic State to expand, the state itself to expand, this is natural in all nations. This is true in all nations. I just want to tell this person one small thing. Rome, the Roman Empire, ruled, and the Mediterranean Sea became a lake. There was an emperor, may God have mercy on him, and these were just some nice farmers, princes, living in Rome. In the Italy we know, some tribes attacked them, setting them back 40 years. They came back again, and then he said, "Yes, we got back on our feet, but those same tribes will come back and covet us again, because we are a nation of builders and workers, while they are lazy and want to take advantage of us." Yes, so they decided to leave. They left and didn't return until they turned around from the other side. So what is this called? Is it spreading by the sword or spreading by roses, perfume, and jasmine? It's what it is. This is the crisis. You present a doubt to someone, and if this doubt is inherently flawed, people are misled because of a psychological defeat within them. I want to tell you something. If people were guided simply by knowing the truth, there wouldn't be anything called a state, or a court, or a police force, or an army, or intelligence, or anything. The moment you and I disagree, if we were guided simply by knowing the truth, the moment we disagree, let's convince each other. If we can't convince each other, let's go to a third party. A third party has already said that the truth is with so-and-so. The truth is with so-and-so because the world has a state, a court, a police force, an army, and intelligence. The very fact that these phenomena have appeared in the world is proof that people are not guided simply by knowing the truth. There must be power to give the weak their rights and wrest them from the strong. A nation must have the power to defend itself against anyone who intends to oppress or persecute it. That is why states arose. That is why armies arose. This is a human phenomenon, wars and the expansion of states by force. This is a human phenomenon. Who should understand this better than the slaughtered and oppressed people of our time? Look at what is happening in Darzer, the flood of injustice. Look at the truth in every sense. Even the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court condemned Israel and issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. And then nothing happened. What does the weak gain, whether they are humiliated or oppressed? This is a man who used to say, "The hearts of mankind will soften towards you if tears ever flow from your eyes." When you are weak like this and your tears flow, hearts will soften towards you. But will wolves have mercy on the oppressed lamb? The lions and blackness of evil never heard of victory. No heard the doves cry, but he did not pardon her, nor
فما رد عنها الأذى ضعفها ولا أنها ما جنت منكرا. مش ده ليس هذا هو العالم. فبالتالي يا جماعة، يعني يا جماعة الخير، يا أحبابنا، الإنسان يعرف من نفسه أنه لا يهتدي بمجرد الحق.
Excuse her. Rather, he unjustly attacked her, and he pierced her throat with a secret. So, neither her weakness nor her wrongdoing could avert the harm from her. This is not the world. Therefore, my friends, my good people, my beloved ones, a person knows within himself that he is not guided by truth alone, and nations have no oversight, and it is impossible to restrain them or the oppressors except by a counterforce. I mean, the rule used to be, Professor Muhammad, if I don't come to you, you will come to me. That's how nations operated. This is what I mean. Look at the soul within it. I mean the soul I want to.
الرقابة الإلهية يرتكب الباطل لمصلحة
Nothing restrains him from that
لا يحجزه عن ذلك
except force. You know Abu al-Qasim al-Shabi, when he said, "There is no opinion for the weak truth, nor is there any deterrent, and opinion is opinion, the Almighty, the All-Powerful. There is no justice except when forces are balanced and terrorism is met with terrorism." This, by the way, is a principle in law. We have a very famous legal scholar in Egypt named Sanauri Pasha Abul Razak. Sanauri, in the introduction to one of his famous books, he says that the law governs between two strong people or between two weak people, but between a strong person and a weak person, there is no law. Might makes right. So now, if we want to establish a just state on this land with these people, we must arm ourselves with power. You will always find that falsehood is the one that begins by persecuting truth, because falsehood cannot tolerate the existence of truth. This is always the beginning. Now, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that falsehood does not persecute truth. Isn't it the moral duty of truth to rescue the weak and oppressed? I mean, if I were now a strong Islamic state and I saw a bloodthirsty criminal man oppressing his people, torturing them, imprisoning them, killing them, crushing them, isn't it the moral duty of the strong to rescue the weak and oppressed? This is considered a flaw, not a virtue. It's a virtue, a virtue, a virtue, that you fulfill your moral duty. So, if we look at the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, we will see that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, never used force or weapons as long as he was in Mecca. He and his companions endured torture and persecution. Now, the Prophet wanted to leave and reach the city. What happened? The people of falsehood chased him away, and those who disbelieved said to their messengers, "We will surely expel you from our land, or you will return to our religion." There is no choice. Even when the Prophet left his land, they chased him and placed a bounty of 100 camels on his head. He reached Medina and was under the protection of its people. The disbelievers sent a message to the people of Medina, "You have given us refuge, so by God, if you do not hand him over to us, we will march against you all." And indeed, this message began to cause some crisis and disruption in Medina, especially among the polytheists who had not yet embraced Islam. Speaking from a nationalistic perspective, they say, "And why should we? We are exposing our country to a political crisis with the Quraysh, and the Quraysh are the capital of the Arabs and the existing regional power. Will we not be able to go on Hajj? What about our trade relations? Someone intends to cause us problems." Yes, of course. This is the Quraysh message. If you want to translate it into modern terms, it is from the presidency of the Quraysh Republic to our beloved brothers in the presidency of the independent state of Medina. In recognition of the sovereignty and independence of states and in accordance with the principles of international law, a man who is outside the bounds of justice and law has fled to you. We request his extradition so that he may be given a fair trial according to the law in the Quraysh constitution. Therefore, they have two options: or we will consider any action you take a violation of international law and a breach of the norms between independent states. Consequently, your state has become a platform for threatening Quraysh national security, and therefore we will be forced to declare war on you. This is if you are trying to translate the message into modern terms. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was expelled, and his companions were expelled. I want to hand them over. I am telling you that these people have been sent out and are mobilizing to fight the Muslims. Indeed, if it weren't for the fact that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, calmed their anger with his wisdom and said, "The threats of the Quraysh against you have reached their limit. They plot against you more than even you plot against yourselves and your families. You kill your sons and brothers. He continued until he was able.
فقال والله لو منعتني البيت لمنعتك طريقك إلى الشام. عايز أقول ففي حالة حرب معلنة بدأت من قبل مين؟ من قبل أهل الباطل.
Custom, he said, by God, were it not for the protection of Abu Umayyah, you would not have left Mecca safely. Sard replied, by God, if you had prevented me from entering the Kharbar, I would have prevented you from reaching Syria. I want to say that in a declared war, initiated by the people of falsehood, it is because the nature of falsehood is to cannot tolerate the existence of truth. The existence of truth itself is a threat to falsehood. When you see a model of truth, for example, why did the Arab states conspire against the Arab revolutions? Because the existence of a model of honorable people living in freedom is a threat to all tyrannical regimes. Therefore, why did Europe conspire against Napoleon and the French Revolution? Because the existence of a republic with elections, or the existence of a revolutionary idea other than monarchy, threatens all royal thrones. So, generally speaking, any value, any true value, will inevitably be pursued by falsehood. Now, Professor Muhammad, to keep the question focused, you said a moment ago that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was in Mecca and preached peacefully, saying, O people, say, there is no God but God. They fought him, so he decided to leave. They pursued him, then he went to Medina, where he threatened and the people of Medina threatened him. Do I understand from this that the essence of our Islam and our call is to spread it with kind words? Yes, not with a sword. This is where scholars differed. Scholars differed on whether the fundamental relationship of the Islamic State with others is peace or war. That is the fundamental principle that we are peaceful unless attacked, or is the fundamental principle that we fight to save people from the injustice inflicted upon them. There is disagreement, but I want to tell you, I am not a jurist, but I want to tell you from a historical perspective that this disagreement is theoretical, meaning it is intended to be a legalistic framework for rulings, but practically speaking, falsehood cannot tolerate the existence of truth, so conflict is inevitable. The crisis between the state of right and the state of wrong is inevitable. Okay, let's focus on history. Now, it's the right of nations to possess power, as we mentioned in our summary. Nations have power, and when they act, it's natural for them to defend themselves, and so on. Now we come to the sword, which is the language of power. But the sword, for Muslims, for Islam, when we acted because we were thirsty for blood. We acted because we wanted to impose Islam on people, not for any other reason. This is beautiful. This is the truth the Muslims, in their movement to spread Islam, waged wars of morality. This sword was not for oppression and bloodshed. Therefore, one of the miracles of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is that he achieved the greatest of these results with the fewest casualties. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, led 27 campaigns, and fighting occurred in only 9 of them. The rest were due to the Prophet's strategic planning, his access to information, and his rapid preparation, which prevented fighting. This led to a decrease in the number of Muslim casualties. The Muslims fought under the rulings that instructed them on how to use this sword. Therefore, there is a very large body of Islamic jurisprudence on the ethics of war. The ethics of war, in other words, are a catalog. Yes, and if you were to compare this catalog, theoretically, the UN Charter, and all that stuff wouldn't stand up to it, not even theoretically, let alone practically. Have you ever seen anyone fighting while respecting the UN Charter? It's impossible. The UN Charter isn't even worth the ink it's written with. In practice, when armies go forth, they commit atrocities, killing people, destroying countries, raping women, and confiscating wealth. This was not the case in Islam. That's why Gustave Le Bon, the French scholar, said that history has never known conquerors as tolerant as the Arabs, nor a religion like theirs. God willing, when we come to the topic of the rightly guided caliphate and talk about the Islamic conquests, I will bring you a number of testimonies from non-Muslim historians about the remarkable merit of their Islamic conquests and that they were the most merciful conquests throughout history. But right now, we are talking about the battles of the Prophet, peace and blessings. First day, he peace and blessings be upon him and his companions had their properties seized in Mecca, and all their possessions were confiscated. That is, all the immigrants who left had their properties seized and confiscated by the Quraysh. As we said, a state of war was declared, so it was natural for the Prophet to take up this sword and fight in order for this state to survive. But taking up the sword is one thing, and injustice by the sword is another. You cannot say that there was a battle fought by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that was a battle of injustice or aggression, or that exceeded this moral standard. That doesn't exist. This is an interpretation that the Muslims and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, took up the sword. Every nation must have strength. Every state must have strength. Well, when this state was established, the conflict began between it and the state of disbelief, which was the Quraysh at that time. Now, the Quraysh could not tolerate the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, calling to monotheism even when he was oppressed under their rule in Mecca. How could they tolerate it after they had established their own state? Just as the Americans, for example, now allow Islamists to have a state. This is the civilizational alternative, this competing idea. How can they allow it to have a state? They don't allow it, and they use all legal and illegal means to prevent it. So, the American and the Western continue to worship democracy. But what happens when democracy brings an Islamist to power? What does he do? Does he turn against them? Does he support a military coup? Or does he invade them? Does he fight them? Does he besiege them? Does he impose sanctions on them? Well, wasn't the Quraysh a secular state at that time? Oh, my dear, you want to remind me? You want to make me dizzy? You want to do whatever you want? Fine, a man brought a new religion. Why are you upset? What scared them about this? Yes, this is it. This is it. They realized that Islam is, in reality, a new system, not just another idol or a new one added to the 360 idols. They saw in Islam a change of system. Say, there is no God but God. You want people who profit from idols, exploiting people, trading, and spreading superstitions, and it enslaves people and has its place in the Arabian Peninsula, increasing their poverty. So, you want to come now and tell them to abandon idol worship and worship God, the blessed and exalted. No, the falsehood that has formed around the system that benefits from enslaving people to people, the system that benefits from enslaving the poor, the system that benefits from these conditions, sees Islam as a threat to it. Take America, for example. Has anyone spoken to America? Did the person who started a revolution in Tunisia, or Egypt, or Palestine, or Syria threaten New York? But the existence of an Islamic state here is equivalent, for the Americans, to having oil that you take for next to nothing, or for free, and having influence, and then someone comes along and says, I want to be independent of its resources. Or how can you spread a certain idea, the idea of the West, the idea of decadence, the idea of controlling people under the guise of democracy and human rights, and then someone comes along and says, I have another idea, which he sees as a suitable, civilized alternative. So, I want to say he's sitting comfortably in America. No one's threatening him there, but he knows that the emergence of an idea that rivals the civilizational idea he's promoting, or the attempt to achieve independence in these countries and with these resources, he sees as a threat. That's why he sends his armies across the oceans to us, and we're expected to remain silent. That's what they want. He comes and accuses you, saying, you.
جاي رافع الرايه فاكر احمد عرابي عندنا في مصر اللي هي كانت اول محاوله بقى ايه احتلال تحت هذا العنوان يعني. أحمد عرابي بيقول: وقد كنا نعجب كيف أن تعمير القلاع على شواطئنا هو اعتداء على شرف الجيش البريطاني، بينما وجود وورود البوارج إلينا حتى شواطئنا هو نوع من الدفاع عن النفس.
الله.
آه
يا سلام.
هم لما لقوه
إمم.
بيصلح قلاع الشاطئ أرسلوا إليه برقية بيقولوا له: إذا استمررت في إصلاح هذه القلاع فهذا أمر ينتهك الشرف البريطاني.
الله، الله، يا سلام!
هذا هو يا مولانا.
بعدين في دول عندنا ممنوع تطلّع
He
نفط
means
أو غازها أو يعني بتشتغل يعني. إمم.
وهو يعني هو
his
صدق في
control
مسألة
of the
المخدرات.
oceans. George Friedman, in
جورج
his book
فريدمان في
The
كتابه الأعوام المئة القادمة
Next 100
بيقول
Years,
يعني
says that
المخدرات
China isn't
خطر
a
هائل
huge
فوق
threat
منتشر
as
جدا
long
في
as we control the oceans,
عندنا.
as long as we have a military
على سبيل
presence.
المثال
A
يعني على
military
سبيل المثال
presence,
اللي هو
specifically the Pacific
البحر
Fleet, stationed
بيقول لك
opposite
باستخدام
China.
الصين
We can thus
نقدر
restrain
نكتف
this
هذا
giant
المال
because we don't even have to
مش شرط
intervene
حتى انه
inside
يدخل
the
جوه البلد،
country. Our
لان
ability to
قدرتنا
prevent
على
them from
منع
receiving
استقبال
or
النفط
exporting
بالنسبه
oil
لنا
is
احنا ماسكين البحر.
enough to
فلكل ما
control
استطاع
China.
الغزو،
Therefore,
هو
he
يقول القرن
says the
القادم
next
وهذا القرن
century,
العشرين
the
القادم
21st,
سيكون
will be
أمريكيا
American as long
وأمريكا
as America has sole
السيطرة
control
على
of the
المحيطات
oceans and as long as
ويمكن
it's
إيقاف
impossible to
القمار
drop a
في
nail
المحيطات
into the ocean without
والاستعمار الصهيوني.
American satellites detecting it. So, anyone who
الإنسان
talks
في
about
هذا
spreading by the
الإنسان
sword,
الصغير
I
يعني
want to summarize, I want to say there's always a difference between the
يفرق دائما بين
spread
انتشار
of
الإسلام
Islam,
يعني انتشار
meaning the
الإسلام
spread of the
وبين
religion,
قتل
meaning the
المسلمين
submission of
وبين
people to the
توسع
faith, and the
الإسلام.
expansion of the
اعتبار
Islamic
تمكن
State,
هذا
meaning
الأمر
people
ليس بسهل،
converting to the
لأن كان
religion.
في
This didn't happen
أماكن
in Islam
وفترات
because Islam has clear and
وقع
explicit teachings. There is no compulsion in religion. No one is
ومنشآت
forced to
للدولة
do
الإسلامية لم
anything.
تكن
The
مفتوحة
nations
على
to
العالم،
which the
منشآت
Islamic State
الدولة
expanded were
هناك
not
تدفع
forced to
جزية
convert
وهي
to
أقل
Islam.
ضريبة،
Rather,
ضريبة
they paid the
الإيمان.
jizya, a minimal
فلم
protection
يتحدث
tax.
أحد
No one
عن
was ever
الإسلام،
compelled to enter the religion.
إنما
The
توسع
expansion of the
الإسلام
Islamic
حصل
State occurred like
في
any
أي
state
دولة
in history,
إسلامية
and like
في
any
أي دولة
state
في
in the
العالم
world, it
لا
cannot
يمكن أن
expand except
تتمتع
through military
بقوة
force.
عسكرية،
Indeed,
لا
no
يمكن أن
state
تأتي
can
دولة
survive
إلا
without
بالقوة العسكرية.
military power.
طيب
So
كيف
how did
بدأ؟
this begin?
بدأ
It
بإنشاء
began with the
الدولة
establishment of the
التي كانت
Islamic
في
State,
موطن
which arose in
حرج،
a threatening environment.
ولا
It
بد
was
لهذا
imperative for
الكيان
this state to
قوة
exist and to defend
داخل عن نفسها أن
itself.
تكون
It must be
قوية،
powerful, and
وبعدين
then the
تبدأ المعركة
natural,
الطبيعية
spontaneous
التلقائية
battle
بين
between
الحق
right and
والباطل.
wrong
لا
begins.
يسكت
Neither
أحدهما
will be
إلا
silenced
بالقضاء على
until the
الآخر
other is
بتفاعل
eliminated.
طبيعي كده.
This is a
لا
natural
يمكن
reaction,
لا
a
يمكن
natural chemical reaction that cannot be stopped.
الباطل لا
Yes,
يهدأ.
falsehood does not
وأنا
subside.
ذكرت
And I
لكم
mentioned
حتى
to
لو
you
كان
that even
الباطل
if we
يهدأ
were to say that
سيرى أهل
falsehood
الحق أن
subsides,
لديهم
the people
واجبا
of truth
قانونيا
will see that they have a
لإنقاذ الناس
moral duty to
المستضعفين،
save people,
إنقاذ
to save
الضعفاء
the
والظالمين.
enslaved,
هذا
to save the
لأن
weak and
المسلمين
oppressed.
حين دخلوا
This
إلى
is
البلاد
because
التي
when the
استعمروها
Muslims entered the
لم
lands
يقبلوا
whose
بحكم
people had
الإسلام
enslaved
وضاقوا
them,
عليهم
they
فقط
did not
وإيصال إلى
demand
رسالة
that they
الإسلام
convert
فقط.
to Islam. They
لذلك
only lifted the
المسلمين
injustices that had been inflicted upon them. Yes, and therefore, the
لتحرير
Islamic
البشر،
conquests later on would
لتحرير
truly
البشر
be the
وليس
broadest movement
لإزالة
for the
العنصرية.
liberation of humanity,
هناك
not for
مناطق في
bringing people
العالم
into
الإسلام
Islam. There are
ضعيفة،
regions where the spread
وهناك
of
مناطق
Islam as a religion remained weak,
من
and there are
العالم
regions, of course,
بالتالي
from the beginning,
الاختبار حول
where
الصورة
many embraced the
الإسلامية
religion.
في حال
Therefore,
انتشار
the one
النصرانية
posing this
أصبح
question should
والأساس
differentiate
يعرف
between the
الإسلام
spread
والأساس
of
الإسلامي.
religion and the
عارف
expansion of the state. He should
كلمة أبو
know that
تمام
any
الطائي
state that
أفضل من
expanded by the
البغل
sword, I know the
في
famous
حده
saying of
وموطنه
Abu Tamam, the sword is
وبالمناسبة
truer in its tidings than
سيقول
books.
أجده
Its edge is the
سيقول
dividing
المصلي
line
ولو
between
قلت له
seriousness
أينما
and jest.
بسيفه،
And in it, he says, I answered him with the
المصلي ولو
sword's
قال
edge
لك عندما
drawn, and
نتوقف
if
في
you
بلد
answered with
فيها
anything
ظلم
other than the sword,
من
you would not
دولة
answer.
على مملكة
Shorky, in the poem in which
على
he praised
الإساءة بيدعون
Ataturk,
الملك على
said,
الكتاب.
Tell the one who said, a kingdom is built on battalions. The kingdom is built for books. Battalions are what build nations, not books. He meant the legalists, and he meant
ولا أنسى
legal
هنا
discourse
محاضرات
and legal rights. What I will not
الشيخ
forget.
الشوكيري
Here,
من
Sheikh
علماء
Murad is Ahmed
الحقوق
Shukeri.
والتحرير الفلسطيني.
Ahmed Shukeri, who
أحمد
was the
الشوكيري
first
كان
president of
مدرس
the
في
Palestine Liberation Organization, was a
معهد
lawyer.
الأعمال
His
الإسلامية
complete
في
works
5
were
مجلدات
published in 5
في
volumes by
مجمع
their
البحوث العربية.
Center for Arab
المجلد
Unity
الأول
Studies.
والثاني
The
اسمه
first 2
مذكراته،
volumes are his memoirs.
ومذكراته
He
طويلة
is a legal man,
وممتعة.
and what a man!
هو
He is
قانوني
patient. His memoirs are
ومنحت
beautiful by
لهذه
their way.
الشخصيات
He is a lawyer. So he was one of the most important figures who wrote memoirs and research proving the Palestinian right because he was present in the Arab Higher Committee, yes, in Palestine. After that, he was an advisor to the Syrian delegation at the United Nations in the became the president of the Palestine Liberation Organization. He had connections with European and American committees and the UN committees that came to hear both sides. The one who prepared the most memoranda in the Palestinian rights statement says in his memoirs, and even before he prepared the memoirs, he says that when he was a lawyer and there was Zionist activity to seize land and brokerage, he says that he exerted a great effort to recover the lands, so he would refer to the records of the Ottoman state, which showed where the borders of these lands were and who owned these lands. He says, and we were indeed able to recover a lot of the lands that were seized through illegal means. He says, but now, after 40 years of this talk, all the effort we made was in vain. We have discovered that our existence is derived from force, not from right. All the lands that we recovered through the law, sleepless nights, and searching in archives, all of it went under the guise of settlements. Yes, it became settlements, and it went under the threat of force. So, in the end, the Palestinian cause is weak and flimsy to exist in this world without force. Certainly, Professor Muhammad, he is Shushu, telling you, so you, my brother, you Muslims, you tell us there is no compulsion in religion, so we go out. So, on the right, we see there is no compulsion in religion. Looking to the left, we find the noble prophetic hadith, I have been commanded to fight the people until they submit, until they testify that there is no God but God, until they testify that there is no God but God. Isn't there a contradiction in this? Yes, that's their point. Without going into too much detail, the intention behind the Prophet's hadith, peace and blessings be upon him, is for Islam to become dominant. Otherwise, Islam itself is what preserves the rights of those who do not submit. Islam itself preserves the rights of those who do not submit. So, you find how it deals with them. The body of Islamic jurisprudence is full of examples of how it deals with Jews, Christians, and non-Muslims. And Umar said regarding the Magians, they are subject to the laws of the people of the book. And later, when we conquered India, and these were pagans, they were subject to the laws of the people of the book, the Jews and Christians. So, I want to say that, in reality, the rights of non-Muslims are not preserved except through Islam. But I want to clarify something, and I ask God to grant me success in clarifying it. Look at modern countries. In modern countries, you have the rights of citizenship as long as you hold the nationality of that country, a state. But you can't have citizenship rights if you're a foreigner. Right? Yes, for example, a citizen has the right to education, but a foreigner doesn't have that right unless the state allows it. They have the right to healthcare, the right to services. There are rights based on citizenship. Is the state obligated to any rights towards a foreigner? Absolutely not. It has the right to deny or revoke residency. In fact, if the state wants to punish someone, it can withdraw their citizenship, thus stripping them of their rights. Right now, Islam, whose citizenship is Islam, means that in the Islamic perspective, which is based on the Jewish and Christian faiths, a foreigner is considered a foreigner. However, in the modern state's view, they have the same rights and obligations as us. So, the difference is huge. I want to tell you, in response to the argument based on this hadith, that the meaning of this hadith, whether it refers to Arabs or even to people in general, without going into the details of jurisprudence, is that when Islam prevails, people's rights are protected by the sovereignty of Islam. That's why many nations welcomed Muslims. The conquerors rejoiced that the oppression of their fellow Muslims had been lifted from them, and they wrote that the Muslims did not persecute their people but were merciful to them and did not destroy their churches. All of this was mentioned by non-Muslims because of the way Muslims treated others. So, the goal of Islam, or the goal of the Muslims in arming themselves with force, taking up the Islam, is for this justice to prevail, the justice that Islam represents, under whose shade everyone receives their due. Okay, Professor Muhammad, I
طيب أستاذ محمد
mean, can someone listening to us now tell
أنا هلا بقول
you
لك
frankly,
بصراحة
may God reward you, your answer is strong and good and so on, but I'm still not convinced. So we ask him why he's not convinced. My dear, I'll tell you, because you didn't talk about the outward appearances. Tell us about some of the outward appearances that prove that you truly left to lift oppression and not just to spread Islam by force and coercion as some claim. Do we, for example, have a set of
قاعدة إنه
texts, a religious text that indicates that, by God, they are commanded to carry the sword and go fight people and spread Islam by force? This is a text, and I am not saying this because there's a text here attributed to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 35 and onwards. This statement is attributed to Jesus Christ himself in their books. He says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, a son against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and enemies against enemies, and so on." I don't know if this statement is true or not, but other nations, when they moved and when they triumphed, crushed humanity. Yes, this happened in all other nations. When they felt they had power in their hands and they entered and took control, it was a pleasure for them to kill people, to crush their dignity and humanity. It was a pleasure to seize what they had, and because of their gluttony, they might burn everything, their libraries, their mosques, anything you want. Now, Professor Muhammad, when Islam moved, entered, and triumphed, were we like these people? So, to prove it, that's it. We agree now that no one entered Islam by force. Everyone entered because they loved the idea and knew that it would lift oppression from them and establish justice. Look, this matter has two parts. First part is what happened during the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as we are now discussing their biography. The second part is what relates to the conquests that began during the era of the rightly guided caliphs. If we are now in the biography part, then all the wars of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, were only in response to aggression. That is, all the battles of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, were the battle between him and Mecca, which was ignited first by the Quraysh, and the battles against the Jews when they broke the covenant that governed relations and betrayed the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, or the Arab tribes that mobilized to fight the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, or the Romans who killed Muslims and killed the Prophet's preachers, peace and blessings be upon him. So, the battles of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and of course, in Khaybar, and Khaybar was a center of conspiracies and wars against him. So, if we're talking about the battles in the life of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, we won't find a single action that wasn't purely defensive. When we come to the conquests and ask how they began, we'll see that the very first moments of these conquests were also acts of aggression by the Persians and the Romans against the Muslim nation. The initial moments, the very beginning of the conflict, were initiated by them, whether by the Persians when they supported the apostate movement in Eastern Arabia, or by the Romans when they harassed the Muslims in the regions bordering Syria and when they had killed some of them earlier. Towards the end of the Prophet's life, peace and blessings be upon him. Therefore, if you want to say that all Muslim actions were defensive, or that their origin was defensive, then that statement is correct. I've jumped to conclusions about this historical fact and wanted to say that, my friends, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that falsehood didn't initiate the aggression. If falsehood didn't initiate aggression and merely oppressed people in its own land, is it morally obligatory for the strong to leave the weak alone or not? You'll find that most people say it's the moral duty of the strong to save the weak, as evidenced by their current calls for the United Nations to intervene and pressure Israel for the International Court of Justice. Israel, if this moral duty weren't present in people's minds, what would they say? Everyone can do whatever they want, as long as there's no moral obligation. What does the strong think about saving the weak? I want to tell you that, even logically, if no aggression has occurred, the moral duty still dictates this. So, what's your proof that you've fulfilled your moral duty, God willing? When we discuss the conquests, I'll bring you the words of non-Muslims explaining how Islam lifted oppression from people and how it saved these nations. And the discussion there is, of course, delightful, beautiful, and truly wonderful, God willing. But right now, at this moment, I must say that Muslims and non-Muslims alike must understand that as long as a person doesn't find guidance simply by knowing the truth, and as long as there is injustice, falsehood, and enslavement, then the end of this will be inevitable. Using force would lead to this right being violated, and that's why the Prophet took up the sword, and that's why the Islamic State began. This wasn't about forcing people to embrace the religion, but rather it began as a defense of the truth and ended as fulfilling a duty. Perhaps one of the strongest pieces of evidence that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, wasn't eager to spread Islam by the sword is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So, you people want to come to an understanding? Okay, fine, come to the table and we'll talk. And when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, prevailed, he said, "Now what do you think I'll do to you?" They said, "A noble brother and the son of a noble brother." He said, "Go, for you are free." If the Prophet wanted revenge, he wouldn't have heard that Sa'd ibn Ubadah, the leader of the Khazraj, said, "Today is the day of battle." He replied, "Sa'd lied. The Arabs say lied when they mean to err. Today is the day of mercy." This is the Prophet's statement, peace and blessings be upon him. Therefore, to understand the issue of force and how it affects the establishment of truth and the refutation of falsehood, I find this very compelling. One of them summarized the sermon by saying, when the Prophet came without force, without a sword, they said to him, "Woe to you! Is this why you gathered us?" When he came with thousands of swords of conquest, they said, "A noble brother and the son of a noble brother." This is the world. This is the world. Yes, my dear, you must have power to protect the word you speak. Right. Okay, Professor Muhammad, if I ask you question number 28, which is related to what we are talking about now, we will exceed the time limit. Okay, so we will leave it for the next episode. So, this is the 13th episode. Before we bid farewell to the viewers, we want to summarize what we have said in one sentence. What do we say in response to the claim that Islam spread by the sword? Yes, Islam, the religion, did not spread by the sword. No people were forced to embrace Islam, but the Islamic State expanded by the sword as any state expands in history, and no one entered Islam by force. No one entered Islam by force. This means clear teachings and explicit texts. I am truly happy and enjoying the episodes where I ask just one question. May God reward you, Professor Muhammad. Welcome, my brothers. Dear viewers, until we meet again in the next episode of the 100 Questions in History series, where we answer pressing and important questions about our Islamic history. May God protect you. Until then, to watch more programs about Islamic history and learn about its events, victories, defeats, leaders and scholars, its secrets, governance, politics, wars, and battles, simply follow our YouTube channel, Our History. Our history stretches from the furthest point in the past to the furthest point in the future history will speak for itself.